Welcome to the session, Driving Action Through Insights, Achieving Stakeholder Alignment and Activating Insights. Thank you for joining me. I'm Carol Shea of Olivetree Insights. I'm your host for this session, as well as founder and lead insights director of Olivetree Insights. We equip our brands with the right research and intelligence for a better return on investment. Our session today will provide a roadmap for getting to our destination, customer centricity, by putting new tools in place, our GPS, to navigate away from the roadblocks, potholes, and detours that can get in the way and accelerate us towards success. I'll be asking a couple of questions later in the presentation. They show up here on this slide, but there's no need to do anything about those yet. Just a heads up that I'd like you to post some of your responses to these questions in the chat box. But before we get to the roadblocks, I'd like to focus a bit on our destination, customer-centric organizations. We're living in a golden era for marketing researchers, a time when C-suite execs have realized that being functionally, financially, operationally driven is not enough. They need to be insights driven and use those insights to drive growth. And we're here to deliver that. But unfortunately, too many leaders are under the illusion that they are customer-centric. They're claiming to have won. But we know this is not the case, and I know that because I've spent the last 4 years researching this problem. As a Quirk study found out, researchers at least sometimes find that their insights are not acted upon by management. And half the time, this happens often or always. Helping organizations be more customer-centric may seem very straightforward, but for insights and analytics teams in healthcare environments, it's far from simple. Not only do we face a complex and rapidly changing external environment, insights teams also face complex and rapidly changing internal environments, where business teams are running to catch up with the new realities brought about by COVID. Our internal stakeholders want insights but don't always know what they need and how to use the results. They have lots of data, but processes to respond to customer experience in real time haven't been developed yet. And there's a lack of resources for doing all the research that's needed. It's becoming obvious the fuel isn't always making it to the engine. Our team at Olivetree wanted to really understand what made customer centricity so hard. So we interviewed research teams to learn what they were hearing from their stakeholders. Let's see if any of these sound familiar.
Why didn't you ask any questions about the new competitive product launch? This study can't have included the right people.
Hey, we've got a new $20 million campaign running soon. Can you help me justify it?
Our research with over 20 corporate insights teams found that there were 4 major causes for the fuel not making it to the engine. First, who's in the car? When the right people aren't involved in a project, there'll be misses. Final decision makers need to be involved in the setting of objectives. Or are they delegating them down to the right people? Are key influencers in other departments missing? Next, those darn roadblocks and potholes. You keep getting stuck because you're focused on a single question and perhaps not seeing the big picture. Project-focused research doesn't often work with agile or design thinking, or really many of the business processes today. Instead, the focus should be on iterative learnings. How often do we leap into action, hey, just go run a few focus groups, even though we know that the problems are not clearly defined and we don't necessarily get all the facts up front? And finally, that recalculating. Lack of accountability for using research. Sometimes business partners have expectations about what they're going to learn. They just know everyone is going to love their new website interface. So if the opposite is true, they just won't believe it. Or they blame everything from the wrong people in the study to somehow we're doing it wrong. The rest of this session will provide a GPS system for addressing the complexities and getting agreement on how insights and analytics should activate customer-based decisions. The GPS has 3 primary components: aligning on the right problem, aligning on the right design, and accelerating decisions. we'll start with aligning on the right problem. This is a situation we also often find ourselves in. A marketing person has a challenge and they want researchers' help. So as researchers, we start asking questions. What are some of your favorite probing questions in terms of defining study objectives? I'd love it if you would add those to the chat box, and perhaps we can share those among ourselves, and then we'll review those very quickly at the end of the session. The fact that most of us probably know the right questions to help get at meaningful study objectives is a similar situation that the author of the Checklist Manifesto found. Experts know what they need to do. Yet, as discussed in Dr. Gwande's book, experts were missing key steps in the heat of the moment. When Dr. Gwande created a checklist to use in surgeries, surgeons scoffed. How dare you suggest that I don't know how to do this surgery and what needs to do when? Yet when pressed to use a checklist of best practices, Johns Hopkins hospital infection rates dropped by 20%. The trick was creating the right checklist and applying the questions consistently. In fact, many other professions find this thoroughness and consistency has been shown to have transformational impact on outcomes. Yet still, for most insights teams, the discussions that take place at the start of projects vary tremendously. Sometimes they're thorough and robust, and sometimes they're brief and incomplete. So to probe more consistently and thoroughly, we've created a best-in-class checklist, a Smart Insights brief. This will be the handout that you'll have in your when you get the PDF of the presentation. But fundamentally, it has 3 sections. We very clearly define the business needs, what the business objective is overarching, separate from the decisions to be made, and those are very specific, and they are only made on the basis of the research. That's what we're focused on. We also want to identify how much of the business decision is impacted by the results, because you'll see this later, but that's going to come to play in determining how much and where we put our resources for research. And then finally, in that business needs section, we do want to make sure we understand the background. What's the situation that's driving the need? What are the business leaders' hypothesis and expectations of results? Not so that we can move towards those, but just so that we know if we're not moving towards those, we actually can identify that there will be a gap and do something to help them understand. And then last in this business needs area is identifying all the business units that are impacted by the decision and making sure that they're brought in upfront. Second are the research needs. That covers the research objectives, what must be learned, the standards of making the decision. If you're doing quantitative research, sometimes those standards can be laid out very easily up front. We are looking for a top 2 box. We're response of a certain percentage, or we're looking for a predominance of opinions to lean towards one way or another. And then finally, looking at the research background. What have we done in our company? What other research have we done? What else do we have that can help inform the objective, perhaps narrow the scope because maybe there's some things we've already covered, and then identifying what's out of scope really clearly. And then that's at that point that you get into the methodology and defining the target, timing, and budget. So this alignment phase is pretty straightforward and easy, but also clearly outlined, and stages are separated, and we'll see how this kind of comes to life. There's one more critical component of the Smart Insights brief, which has been elevated as businesses are using more iterative business development practices. A series of decisions, not one, and we know this typically, but decisions are typically broken up into a series of decisions. So we need to identify what the major decision points for reaching that broad business objective are, and then identifying specific steps, the business decision followed by the research objective, followed by the methodology for that particular decision, and then that will over time help us work towards the business objective learnings. This helps us avoid boiling the ocean. Let me bring you around to a case that I worked on about a year ago, and the team had met with some marketing folks over at Dearborn County Hospital. It's a rural health system comprised of an independent acute care hospital, a network of specialists, primary care physicians and providers, and numerous outpatients, service and facilities all throughout southeastern Indiana. It was stereotyped as a small town community hospital and saddled with very outdated negative public perceptions. New management had worked over the last several years to build internal capabilities so that they strongly believed that the services were far superior to what they were getting credit for in the public. To help the health system build community trust and resulting growth in patients based on the reality of their top quality services, the marketing team, including Madison Design Group, advised the management team that a rebranding, including renaming and new communication campaign, was in order. Olivetree was brought in to support the initiative with patient insights. Olivetree worked with the team through the insights brief process, asking the right questions. What's driving the current situation? What might be the root of the poor perceptions? What do we need to achieve? What does success look like? Et cetera, et cetera. And through that process, we identified the overarching objective, which was to increase patient volume through improved perceptions, as well as 4 key business decision stages. 1, to validate the gaps in the perception. 2, to identify the source of the gaps. 3, to identify what is potential, where can we go with messaging and naming. And then last, to actually track the campaign, the messaging campaign, and naming success. And with each of those business stages of decisions, we could come up with correlate research objectives. Now, one of the key roadblocks we discussed earlier was that you keep getting stuck because you're focused on a single question and not asking the big picture. In our case, the team had been focused on increased patient volume, and they were interpreting that as focused on being driven by community perception, forgetting that their employees are a key constituents of creating that perception, as well as representing a significant proportion of users, of patients of the hospital system. So the team recognized that employees embracing a rebranding initiative and advocating on behalf of the healthcare system needed to start very early in the process with making sure that we took into account how they were feeling today, what their perceptions were, and how we needed to evolve their perceptions as well. So the study scope was widened to include employees in the research. The next way we need to align is on using the right resources. For methodology, they flow from the objectives and often include multiple means: secondary, quant, qual, analysis, etc. But rather than focus on specific methodology choices, let's focus a little bit on budget allocation, which I find is often the most difficult gap to bridge. Budgets tend to be based on what things have cost in the past, or an artificial budget is provided by our brand teams. Rather, I'd like to suggest a 3-step assessment: a fit and impact score, an actionability score, and the methodological feasibility, to help us allocate the right resources based on how important a study is to the business, as well as our ability to get the right information into the right hands at the right time. First is the fit and impact score that has 3 separate questions. How closely does the current research objective and study you're working on address a strategic initiative? If it's very aligned, closely aligned with that initiative, you'd have a lot of points. If it's not closely aligned, you'd have few points. Secondly, the impact depth. Is the objective that you're addressing, does the objective represent a financial threat or opportunity And if so, is that substantial or very limited? And again, more points for the more substantial the financial threat or opportunity is. Third, how wide is the impact of the research? So is this something that's very narrow, perhaps only impacting a specific tactic or a line of business, or is it very wide in that it addresses addresses an objective that has implications across the whole organization, the whole company? Next is an actionability score. So this first one is, where are you along the decision stage? Are you doing research at the problem opportunity stage of a decision, which has the highest value often to organizations, or are you doing something like simply validating a tactical decision that's already made? That would be obviously a 2-point or low point type allocation with everything, other kinds of decisions in between. And then the second question here on actionability is, how will the information be used? Will it drive a decision, or will have no impact? Now, typically we don't have something that's a 10 that's going to drive a decision completely. You have some internal expense, all sorts of other factors that go into a decision besides whether a customer set prefers a certain solution or not. But the more that the research will impact that decision, the higher the actionability score. You certainly get the bottom end where management is going to determine the course of action no matter what the customer says. So the higher the score, the better there. And third, methodological feasibility. So this follows the type of thinking path where you might start with something like, do we have information that exists in-house someplace that would help answer this decision? Going down the yes path, does it answer it sufficiently? If yes, use in-house information. If partially, you might want to reframe the question and start over. If no, and that might be no, we don't have enough information in-house. As you move through that aggregate score of impact and actionability, you're going to come up with a high measure, a medium measure, and a low measure. If it's a high impact and actionability, you are going to want to allocate higher resources and marketing research analytics. And then obviously down medium and low would be lower. Now, I've provided this tool to 2 clients to test, and here's what I've learned so far. First, corporate insights teams love having a standard for them to guide them on when to ask for more budget or when to say no to research requests by clients. I think it's actually probably has been used in place to say no than to ask for more budget. But in any case, and that might just simply be because there's such a high demand of requests, and it's so difficult to say no to a specific team that for doing research. It can easily be seen as a political game, and this kind of gets that thinking away from that. It's also interesting that business leaders agree that the approach is very solid, and they're okay with discussions, but they prefer them qualitatively as a discussion point versus actually going through a scoring process, which is completely fair. And actually, just as an aside, if you're willing to test this more deeply, I'll work with your team to optimize the tools so we can share it across the whole insights industry. So now going back to our Dearborn County Hospital case, let's look at the overall plan that was built. The research identified the awareness perceptions via quantitative surveys with employees and with the community. The team then moved through, once we had that understanding, some qualitative focus groups and IDIs with employees, and again with patient population and family population in the area, just to clarify those perceptions, kind of dive deep into why they existed, what the root causes were, and to start to tease around what the current positioning is and how we might start to evolve it. The third phase of research was again focused on focus groups with consumers and employees on helping us refine the messaging, assess a set of names to determine fit and feasibility, and then once the plans were put into place, we built tracking awareness and perceptions and surveys using a whole wide set of tools from qualitative as well as Prescanis and other quantitative community assessments. Now that the research plan is set, we want to make sure that we help our teams reach our destination, our goals, quickly and efficiently. And here's how we get to the acceleration stage of the Smart Insights brief process. To help decision makers make consumer-centric decisions, we first need to build in accountability. And we've covered much of this as we've discussed the Smart Insights brief. In fact, I encourage some type of sign-off process on this brief because then it acts as a signed contract, even if it's literally not signed. It's an agreement of what will be done with the information learned. That accountability is the first really important step in being able to follow up on decisions, etc. Second, to get teams to feel more comfortable making decisions on consumer insights is alerting the business team on what's happening along the way. Are you learning anything from consumers they may not expect? Give them a heads up. Maybe you can get some additional insights to determine why. And maybe you have time to add more sample to the study or do something that will make swallowing tough results easier. In fact, there are many ways to get stakeholders to be more involved with the research team. I'd love to hear ways that you have of maintaining ongoing engagement, whether it's through a research study or in between research studies. Please add that to the chat box and perhaps we can share some ways together at the end of this session. One additional technique for accelerating the action and building action specifically is to lead workshops for every major initiative instead of just presenting the results in a deck. So I like to pre-build that workshop in right at the start so that when we're doing the design, there's an expectation that there will be a workshop that will help the brand team members understand the results of the study as well as start to work through what has to happen next, going beyond the launch of this new name. What measures should we put in place to make sure the success is launched successfully? Who is going to do what? How do we make sure that this research is actually being activated? And we recommend strongly that the Insights team facilitate the workshop. That takes the pressure off the brand team leaders so they can participate and think. And it builds the reputation of the Insights leader as a strategic leader, not just a leader in research. Now, generally, we've done these in live sessions, but the reason I have this specific slide up is to just point out that virtual settings are perfectly appropriate for this kind of debrief as well, especially since there's whiteboard tools like Miro, Mural, or Cardsmith to use alongside of web conferencing. So in this kind of a process, you'd have research presented at a moderated session. During that research study, listeners are charged with identifying nuggets or pieces of information that are going to fuel the next steps. Questions like they might be answering, what does this mean for our brand? What are 3 or 4 big takeaways I personally have? What are we surprised by? Any old hypotheses we've held on for a long time that we need to get rid of? What I wish I knew for future exploration. Then there would be a mini team breakout to work on the next steps, brainstorming all of what to do. And then there'd be another major session to present and prioritize the ideas, score the ideas that came up with that were shared on the mirror or on the mural, and move forward, creating a project plan. Third, in getting leaders to be more consumer-centric is to measure the results. So first we measure, were decisions made on the basis of the research learnings, and how well did they help leaders move forward? This is often accomplished in an email that may follow up several months, weeks or months later, or as an email or a short call. And then second, did the consumer-based decisions lead to the desired business outcomes, and in what ways, yes or no? Going back to the case study, yes, the research prompted decisions. In fact, Dearborn was renamed High Point Health with a full marketing rollout plan to counter any potential skepticism they might face in the community or among employees. So the SMART Insights brief process, the frequent engagement and alignment with all key stakeholders all throughout the process meant that there was more consensus in making the tough decisions, including name, which, as you probably may know, is a difficult process for many. And then as a follow-up, not only did patient survey, community survey scores improve, patient volume increased. Having a good, solid briefing process like the one recommended today has a number of benefits according to those who use it. First, it gives the Insights team, especially junior members, permission for asking the hard questions. Second, it adds to the manager's bandwidth while improving consistency across all individual Insights team members and projects on the why and the how research is conducted. It just means fewer questions going up to the manager level for research. Sharing the SMART brief with cross-functional partners takes some of the emotion out of making customer-centric, consumer-centric decisions, even if they're politically difficult, and increases transparencies to how we work. And then overall, it improves the ROI of research because it's fully being utilized. So after this conference, let me give you 3 easy steps to get started. First, review the Insights brief and measurement templates that'll come along when you get the download of the PDF of this presentation. Secondly, review your own Insights briefing process and formalize it. Make sure that you build in enough robust measures and touch points to really make it meaningful. Do this with your internal team. And then ask one stakeholder team to test the new process. There's nothing better than building in an internal brand team advocate, especially when they see how well the process works overall. So now we can go from insights that are often not being acted on to insights that are almost always being acted on. Thank you so much for your attention, and now let's move to questions and comments.